Welcome everybody. As you know, the title is Finding the Elusive Exodus. And you'll see in a minute why I've called it the Elusive Exodus, because I don't think there's any other date in the history of mankind that is more debated than when was the Exodus, what year it was. The other thing I've got at the bottom is why in 1066 William the Conqueror couldn't lose. Whatever he did, he couldn't lose. And Harold couldn't win. Okay? We'll see that when we get to the end. All right? Here we go. Bible chronology, a timeline of biblical events. Bible chronology is literally using the dates and the information provided from the Bible to do with history, to date something. There's all other methods, but the one we're looking at is what are the dates in the Bible, like how accurate are they? This particular research started a few years ago when we were in England. It's well known in England, maybe the British Commonwealth, but particularly in England, the most well-known date in the whole of British history is the Battle of Hastings. And there's no doubt that was 1066. So I thought, well, if that's such a big historic date, and also we acknowledge that it's the last of the tribes of Israel coming into England, well, then maybe it connects back with the Bible. Now, there's a big period of time in the Bible which comes up a lot in Bible prophecy. It's called the 7 times punishment. And we know that works out to a period of 2,520 years. It fits in lots of places that you're going to see today. So I thought, well, I wonder if I went back from 1066 AD, 2,520 years, what I would come to. Well, I came to 1455 BC and I had no idea what that was. I knew it was in the vicinity of the Exodus, and that was the first thing that came into my mind. Would that be the year of the Exodus? And then I started looking to see what date is the Exodus. I never really thought about it before. We're not actually trying to find Nemo, we're trying to find the Exodus. I'll go to the next one. This particular chart, maybe some of you have got a copy of it, it's a well-known chart, a timeline of biblical history. It's maybe the most comprehensive, not saying it's perfect, but pretty good record of what I'm talking about today. So just in the beginning it says, presenting a panoramic sweep of the Bible from Adam and Eve to the crucifixion of Christ and the development of the early church. The concertina-style time chart is based on the biblical history compiled by Archbishop Ussher. He comes into this quite a bit today. In the 17th century, the interpretation is traditional, from Adam and Eve to the crucifixion of Christ, and the time chart presents a graphic and accessible way for the reader to follow the narrative flow of the Bible. So we're going to look at this guy, Ussher. Throughout this timeline, going back from Adam and Eve, it is Ussher that worked out their time change. Now you notice that one of the pages under the Exodus has got 1491 BC from Egypt. Ussher worked that out. And then later on in the couple of bits from other pages, on the left you've got in the middle there the brazen serpent, the law given in Sinai, 1491 BC. Then over here we see 4 different dates. Now all the other dates, they didn't query them. The one that he queries and puts down other people's opinion is the date of the Exodus from a guy called Poole, another guy called Hales, another guy called Unsen, and then Ussher himself, 1491. So immediately you realise that this is a debatable point. Look up this guy Poole, don't have to read all that. He came up with a long way away, 1652 BC. They had a guy called Hales, that's a bit of a blurry copy, that's all you can get of it, of where he also, the chronology and geography, biblical and so it goes on. So he came up with 1648 BC. I couldn't find anything on whoever Unseen was, but he was 300 years away, 1320 BC. Then we go to this guy Ussher. Now, he was an Anglican archbishop, but like some of these guys, he was mostly more scholar than he was religious. Anyhow, he was the one that worked on that timeline. He was a prolific scholar and church leader, and so it goes on about Ussher. So he was back in the 1600s, 1625 to 1656. Some of our Bibles, you might have one, hard to get, have actually got the dates on the bottom of the page of each chapter. If you've got a Bible that's got the dates, it's Usher. That's the one they've mainly used. So there's one of my Bibles there on the right. As you can see right down the bottom, that's the chapter on the burning bush. Right down the bottom of that, 1491 BC, which of course was the same year of the Exodus. Now I'll grab a few others and just show you a little bit how confusing this is. A well-known author called David Roll wrote a lot of books, and he's got 1447. One of our founding fathers called Tom Foster, he wrote a book called The Great Pyramid, and many other books he wrote. He works on what's called pyramid inches, and they go through the pyramid, and there's a little thing called a boss, they call it an inch. They do all these measurements, but it's very hard to work anything accurate for all the fact they work. By the way, it does come into other parts which are really clever and very accurate. You don't have to think too much about it, particularly Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19 and 20, which is the Great Pyramid in the Bible, and the pyramid inches comes into that. But here you see a chart right back out of his book, which comes from the early magazines, working out historic, and none of that really happened like they said. 1453 was not a big date. They go up to 1972. This is back in the 40s they did this. Nothing happened much there. 1986, 2001. So they've got all these predictions, and the same with working out the date of the Exodus. So he comes up, Tom Foster, and quoting people like David Davidson, a well-known pyramidologist. Well, he was 1486, and Tom is 1453. So again, another guy well-known called E. Raymond Capt, and he's 1486. One of our brothers in Auckland, New Zealand, a well-known brother called John Vermeer, he's a physicist, a very bright boy, part of the Auckland Fellowship. He did his own research, and this is not criticising anybody else's research. It's just more so pointing out there are differences, and the one that we followed through that seems to link up more with other parts of the Bible. So up the top you've got Josephus, the great Jewish historian of 2,000 years ago. He came up with 1648. Usher, one we've already talked about, 1491. A couple of other guys, 1476, 1446. And John himself came up with 1602. We got this chart, and we particularly pick on the year 586 BC. Some people want to go from 4000 BC or 4004, try to work through to the New Testament, quite convinced that 4000 BC was when Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden. But in actual fact, there's nowhere in the Bible that says that. And from our research, it's out by quite a few years. So anyhow, the one date that we work on is 586 BC. Why do we go not more towards the New Testament? There's a big gap there, as you know, in your Bible. It only goes to 400 and something BC, the book of Malachi. And then there's a big gap right through to the New Testament. There's no dates in there, the time of the Maccabees and all of that sort of time. But the good thing with 586 BC is that it's a date that's agreed upon by the vast majority of historians, both biblical and secular, Bible scholars, archaeologists, both biblical and secular. 586 is when Babylon destroyed the city of Jerusalem. Nobody seems to debate that date, 586. So what a guy we're going to look at in a moment, and maybe Usher did the same, I'm not sure, take that as an anchor date. So there's a list of some of the dates that we've already gone through, and write down the last two, Usher, 1491. Now the one that we're going to look at is this guy, Lujack Skylark. Now there's a name. If anybody's got a grandchild about to be born, good suggestion. Lujack Skylark. He came only 4 years different to Usher, and we might see why in a minute, why it was 4 years different. They're identical, but there is a 4-year difference. Amazing how it actually comes into it. So there's some of the ways you can try to work through to the Exodus. From the record of the Pharaohs, try to find out which Pharaoh. By the way, their records are all over the place, and often they don't even know who the Pharaoh was. Pharaohs do come into this today, but not working from a Pharaoh to the Bible, but working from the Bible to the Pharaoh. Pyramid inches we mentioned. maybe going backwards through the kings of the 10 tribes. That would never work because there were 6 different dynasties, and often there's not an accurate record of them, so there's nothing there to really. Book of Judges would be impossible to work out Exodus from the Book of Judges, because often there wasn't a judge. The people would get rescued by a judge, and the judge would eventually die. Then they go back worshipping idols for a while. We don't know the period of time he'd raise up another judge, like Samson or Jephthah or Gideon or whoever he raised up. So he couldn't do it that way. And then the one that we're looking at, working backwards through the kings of the 2 tribed houses of Judah, backwards from the captivity of the last king, Zedekiah, in 586 BC, fall of Jerusalem. We got here to the 4th year of the reign of Solomon. So why do we pick on the 4th year of the reign of Solomon? We don't need to go back any further. We can work to that exact date, and then you should know, you're going to see in a minute, what the year of the Exodus is. So try to go through the Pharaohs. That's the little pyramid inch in the pyramid, the judges, kings, and so on. So, why 4 years difference? Simply because Usher worked from 0, which would make sense, 0 between BC and AD, but we actually know that Jesus was alive which sounds crazy, but he was alive 4 years before he was born. He was born at least 4 BC. Why? Because Herod the Great died in 4 BC, and he was alive at the time when the wise men came from the east, the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. So there's the 4 years. So if you work from 0 backwards, you get 1491. If you work from 4 BC, you get 1495. There's that 4-year difference. 586, starting point, counting backwards from the captivity of the last king of Judah, Zedekiah being the same year as the destruction. So we've gone through all of that. So keep going. So we've got this guy, Jack Skylark. When I went back looking for the Exodus from that a couple of years ago with 1066, and it came to 1455, then started all the research. I found this guy online. Blood if we could maybe even find it now, I don't know, but it's even got the time there. At 7:45 p.m. in 2012, April the 18th, this guy, Jack Skylark, put this record up and said, can anybody basically challenge this as being wrong? And what he did is he went backwards. So he got 586 BC, and he knew that Zedekiah reigned for 11 years. Jehoiakim was only a few months, that doesn't change. Jehoiakim reigned for 11 years, and so it goes on. And the Bible accurately records how long each king of Judah reigned. So all he did was simple maths, 586 BC, and just going back through all the kings, and one very nasty queen, Athaliah, you can see her in the middle there about, who was the grandma from hell, who murdered all her grandchildren, but missed out on Joash, who was only 8 and he was crowned later on. And eventually, going through it backwards, you come to the 4th year of the reign of Solomon. So why the 4th year of the reign of Solomon? Because of this one verse. 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1. And it came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, and so it goes on. So going through this time chart we've just done here, going right back to Rehoboam and then to Solomon, you find out the 4th year of his reign was 1015 BC. Now it says here 480 years. So all you've got to do is add 480 years to 1015 and you come to 1495. Simple Bible chronology maths. So there it is. Keep going. Sometimes there are like 2 or 3 other witnesses that lock something in. It just so happens that the ancient Hebrew alphabet with 22 letters, and each letter of the alphabet, Aleph is 1, Beth is 2, and down to the bottom you've got Tau is 400. So eventually it adds up to 1495. So whether that's a little indicator we're on the right money is interesting. You know, in Psalm 119, 176 verses, broken into 22 groups of 8. And again, it's all the letters of the ancient Hebrew alphabet in Psalm 119. So it really sort of nails that down as an important part of the Bible. Just going through some of the events, now that we've got, we believe, anyhow, an accurate record. We start in 586 BC and we go back to Solomon's reign, and the fourth year, 1015 BC, he came to the throne back in 1020 BC to 1019 and goes right through. And the other thing, why is this important, is because we work out some of the big patriarchs of the Bible when they were born and what they did. So we've got Moses of the Exodus in 1495 when he was 80 years old. We have the year that Joseph was born. We have the year that Jacob was born. We have the year that Isaac was born. We have the call of Abraham, which is another big date in the Bible. I won't go through that now. We even go back to the birth of Abraham. So it all ties up once you've got the right date. Just on that 586, just a couple of books that refer to it. Well-known one called Holy Bible Handbook. He's got in there 586 BC. Something was quite recent I found online, published a couple of years ago. Don't even know who they are. But in that it says 586 BC, the Babylonian military led by King Nebuchadnezzar succeeded in breaking a 2-year siege, destroying much of the city of Jerusalem. So there it is. Nobody's disputing that much. So what do we do with now that we've found that out? Now that we've got a timeline of the Old Testament, when things happen, as I said, we can work out when Joseph was born, and we know that he was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery, so that drops down to 1733 BC. So the moment we've got the day that he arrives in Egypt, it's quite easy to then go to Wikipedia records or any other record and said, who do they say the Pharaoh was in 1733 BC? And it's this guy called Sheshi. Now we need a Pharaoh that would reign a long time because Joseph was there for quite a while. Then there's the 7 years plenty and the 7 years, all of that in the reign of one Pharaoh. Welcomes in Jacob and his brothers and all. And this particular Pharaoh happened to reign for 40 years. Joseph arrived in the 12th year. Joseph elevated 13 years later in 1720, in the 25th year of Sheshi, and then 7 years of plenty, 1720 to 1730, 7 years of famine, 1712 to 1705, and the Pharaoh then died the next year, which was convenient. So he was there for 40 years. Because the reason I say that is like the guy down the bottom, he only reigned for about a year and a bit. So it could have been a Pharaoh like that and the whole thing would have fallen apart from what we're talking about. But it actually happens to fit like a glove. So Sheshi came to in 5 years, 1705. Jacob, after 17 years in Egypt, dies. Now, when you read the story of Joseph going to Pharaoh to ask permission to take the body of his father back into Palestine and bury it, he doesn't actually, when you read through it, he doesn't know that Pharaoh. He knew Sheshi, of course. Joseph knew Sheshi very well, and so did Jacob. But we go down a few years later, we've got a new Pharaoh called Nenchefari, who was only there for a short time. He was an okay guy, and he said to Joseph, yes, if you want to take your father back, and even the Egyptians mourned with them, and so on. So that again fits with history. So Pharaohs at the time of Moses and the Exodus. Moses was born in 1575, according to what we just saw. And the Pharaoh at that time was a guy called Pepi. He was the first of the persecuting pharaohs. We've gone down quite a long time from Joseph, by the way, quite a few years. And now when Moses is born, Pepi decides that there's too many of them, will butcher all the little Hebrew babies. And we know that Moses is put in the little basket on the River Nile, and the daughter of a Pepi, the princess, finds him and brings him up as her own. The Bible just keeps saying Pharaoh, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. He's not the same guy. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them in their birth. So not only tried to kill off the little boys, but that was the first oppression of the children of Israel by this time quite a large group of people. So Moses at 40 kills the Egyptian and he flees to Midian. And the Pharaoh at that time was a Pharaoh called Ahmose I, who reigned from 1550 to 1525 BC. He wasn't the original sort of like adopted father. He would have immediately got rid of Moses. And Moses knew that, so he fled. So we jump 40 years, don't we? Moses, while in exile in Midian, a new, even more oppressive Pharaoh comes to power. Pharaoh Amenhotep I, 1525. Now, I haven't got time to digress, but only for a minute. There are two periods of time given that the children of Israel, from the call of Abraham to the Exodus, two different periods of time are given. One is 400 years, the other is 430 years. And it seems as though there's a conflict. I can't go into detail, but it just so happens that 30 years before the Exodus, in 1525 BC, it maybe indicates that there was a change there of where it went from oppression to genocide. Maybe the Lord picked on 1525, 30 years before the Exodus, to indicate that that would be a date to remember. So he then, dear old Charlton Heston, he's Moses, and he returns at the age of 80 and let my people go. And that is 1495 BC. The next Pharaoh is Thutmose I. Now here you see that 4 years comes into it. So if it's 1495 BC, then it's this guy, Thutmose I. But he dies in 1491. Now Usher says 1491, so therefore it would be the next Pharaoh. So it does make a difference. Even 4 years makes a difference. So everything indicates from Bible chronology, they nicknamed him Tut I. He was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He's got a statue of him there, carved one, and that's his mummy. And one thing it records on his history is that he moved into the Levant, which is near Israel, and we do know that he chased Charlton Heston and the children of Israel across the Sinai Desert to the Red Sea. So that would possibly indicate that. Now, all the firstborn died in the Passover, including the crown prince. So the younger brother becomes the next Pharaoh. His name was Thutmose II, from 1492 to 1479. And the one interesting thing with his mummy is absolutely covered in boils. Now, whether you want to make a lot of this or not, it's just a bit of fun, really. We know that one of the plagues, the sixth one, they took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it up toward heaven, and it became a boil, breaking forth with blain. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Oh, here's a question. Amongst a heap of oldies, how many of you have ever had a thing called a boil? Are there any young hands going up? No. For our age, we had these horrible little volcanoes on your neck or something like that, and it's called a blain. So his body, his mummy, is covered as though he was once covered with boils. He was the one who copped it, and then later on he became Pharaoh. But his mummy says, once upon a time, he had boils, but it does indicate that it wasn't hereditary, something happened during his life. Little bits they found out about the first. The only thing they've got on Sheshi, the one of Joseph, that little thing they've discovered there which says, son of Ra, Sheshi given life, in hieroglyphics, I dare say. Then Thutmose I, his particular emblem is another god called Thoth, is born. And then, of course, we have Yul-brynner, made a fantastic pharaoh. The only trouble is they're 200 years out. Now, it'd be far more exciting to have a very military and masculine name like Ramesses rather than Thutmose, which hasn't really got any sound about it at all. So anyhow, they chose, Yul-brynner did anyhow, to become Ramesses, and his name is Ra, the one who bore him. So really, it was way out, that was. But I like the film just the same. So there was that verse again in the fourth year of the reign of Solomon. So if the Exodus was 14 95, then take off 40 years, then the Battle of Jericho must be 1455. And that was the date that I came up with when I came back from 1066 with the 2520, came to 1455. I think I've gone through all that. I just want to finish today with using that great period of time 4 times with big events on each end of that time. Can't be just some little obscure thing. We know from other slides we've shown that a time is 360, means a complete cycle. 360 degrees in a circle, 360 bars of longitude around the planet and so on. We know if we multiply that by 7, we come up with this 2,520. Now, when it talked about the 7 times punishment in Leviticus chapter 26, it actually said it 4 times. So maybe the thought is that it got fulfilled 4 times. And we're just going to have a look at that possibility. So in verse 18 of that chapter, we have the first one, I will punish you 7 times. 3 verses later, I will bring 7 times more plagues upon you. And then another 3 verses later, will punish you 7 times. And then another 4 verses later, then will I walk contrary unto you 7 times for your sins. So in that chapter, he says it 4 times. It's interesting to see if it happened 4 times. Now, the one that we're particularly talking about today, amazingly enough, that does fit. So we'll pick the first one, verse 18, 7 times. 1455 BC, the Battle of Jericho, to 1066 AD was that period of time, 2,520. What is the connection? The first one is when they first went into their promised land in Palestine, and the second one is when the last of the tribes went into the Isles afar off, their second home that God had promised them. So it's 2 major events. Poor old Harold down there with an arrow in his eye couldn't win that battle. The Lord was there. Now, sometimes there's another sort of tie-in, like 2 witnesses. Do we have a right to connect that 7 times with the Battle of Jericho? Well, it is amazing that on that day, 7 times comes up. As you know, and they walked around the walls of Jericho. 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns, and the 7th day they shall compass the city 7 times. And the priest shall blow with the trumpet. It came to pass on the 7th day. They had to get really early that day, go to walk around it 7 times. They rose up early in the dawning of the day and encompassed the city in the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed. So there is an interesting connection. Appears, the word 7 times comes up to do with this particular prophecy. Now that was to do with the whole 12 tribes, of course, the last of the tribes coming in and the 12 tribes going in under Joshua. So that's number 1, verse 18. Now verse 21 was the next time. It mentions it again. Some of these are more well known, and we have the tribe of Manasseh. We just know there that when Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, came to power in the very first year in 745 BC, he took capture a lot of the 10 tribes, but in particular took Manasseh captive. As you can see, has more room than any of the other 11 tribes, and there is a dividing line right there called the River Jordan. Between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea is the River Jordan. So you have a west and an east of their area. That side there is Gilead, the eastern side. That side there is Galilee, where Nazareth is. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took those places. I won't attempt them. One I can say is Gilead, which was eastern Manasseh, and Galilee, which was western Manasseh. All the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. So we believe that Manasseh, the 13th tribe, story of Ephraim, Manasseh, can't go through all that today. We talk about the 13th tribe being Manasseh. So 745 BC happens with that 2,520. We come to 1776 And that, of course, was the signing of we the people, and they declared their independence from Britain, went to war, but it was of God again. King George III couldn't win. He thought he could hang on to that as a colony, and they said, no, we want to be a different nation, a great nation as the Bible calls them. So the third time is an interesting one, verse 24. We've grabbed that third time it's mentioned in Leviticus 26. We come to the tribe of Ephraim. It's still the kingdom of Assyria, but later on they took the more southern part. So down here, there's Ephraim there. This bottom part of the 10 tribes was taken a few years later. We read in 2 Kings 18, and it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, that Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, came against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of 3 years, it doesn't say at the end of his reign, because he died a year before, just at the end of 3 years, the Assyrians, took it. Even in the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is, the 9th year of Hoshea, who was, by the way, the last king of Israel, the 10 tribes. Samaria was taken, and then it's verse 11, and the king of Assyria, this guy called Sargon II actually, he was the one that followed Shalmaneser. He was the one that actually took the tribe of Ephraim and others, but particularly in our thought today, the tribe of Ephraim. So why do we pick on that one? Because up there in 721 BC, when that happened, we add the 2,520 and we come to 1800. I've got there also one, because something happened in both years. In 1800, the exact 2,520, we have what's called the Acts of Union, not singular, because in the British Parliament and in the Irish Parliament, they voted to become one nation. And the following year, we have the United Kingdom, or the Union Jack. So we connect that with Ephraim. We have one more time that the 7 times seems to be fulfilled. 4th time in the book of Leviticus chapter 26. And one we've gone through, we'll have a whole, as you know, lots of slides on that. 604 BC, that was when Nebuchadnezzar came king of Babylon. He co-chaired it with his father Nabopolassar for a couple of years. The Babylonian kingdom actually started 5 years earlier, in 609 BC, when Nabopolassar and the Babylonians finally defeated the Assyrians. But what you think, why don't we date it from the beginning of the Babylonian kingdom? We don't, because when Daniel interpreted the dream of the head of gold and chest of silver and so on, he said to Nebuchadnezzar, thou art the head of gold. He actually pointed to him personally. So we date it from 604 BC. The other interesting thing again is the 7 times bobs up again in this one. And this time it's personally to King Nebuchadnezzar himself, because he got very proud and he walked around that one of the great 7 ancient wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and he started saying how great he was. And look at this great kingdom that I have built. The Lord said through Daniel, not a wise move. Talked about the tree being cut down and stumped, lying in the ground dormant, and then finally coming back to life again. And sure enough, according to that prophecy, when he was in the midst of boasting, he then was struck down like an animal, and 7 times, and this time not in years, which is 7 times 360, a long time, nearly 7 years, he lived in the wilderness like a beast. Talks about his nails growing like claws and his hair growing and so on. And then eventually he was restored, where Daniel said, they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of man, and giveth to whosoever he will. All the political leaders of the world should remember that one. They're only there if God allows them to be so. The big kingdoms I'm talking about, nations. And then we have the destruction of Jerusalem in... we've jumped right through to the Chaldeans, the Babylonians burned the king's house and so on. So that was back in 586 BC, what we were talking about there. So we got the surrender exactly 2,520 years later. We have the mayor of Jerusalem surrendering the city of Jerusalem to 2 British soldiers. under a white flag. So when we date that particular one, we come to 1917, we have the great story of the Australians and the Kiwis on the 31st of October 1917, taking the wells of Beersheba, and exactly 40 days later, Jerusalem being surrendered on the 9th of December. So again, the amazing, that fits again, that 2,520 fits. So it is a big date in Bible prophecy. Just something of a little bit of interest, there's others that I haven't got here, where the 2,520 fits. With that writing on the wall, the fall of Babylon, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, when you add it up, meaning means numbered, is a value of 1,000. A tekel means a shekel or 20. Geras are all in geras. Upharsin means divided, means half a mine. It actually adds up to 2,520. And then we particularly jump through to this verse here and talks about when all that would happen with the children of Israel, but that from 70 AD, under the Romans, they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, the Jews, which we have in all countries. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles till the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. 1917, I think I've mentioned this before when I've given these slides. In 1916, the year before, my father was 14 years old. He was born in 1902. And when he was 14 years old, he went to some sort of a boys' camp, biblical camp of some sort. And there was a preacher got up at that camp and said, next year, Jerusalem is going to be delivered. So many had worked it out before it even happened. It wasn't happened then look back. So when my dad came to the Lord, many years later, in 1960, and people like Pastor Jack Clay were preaching on this sort of thing, he said he remembered that incident. So a couple of slides to finish. What did I say at the beginning? Why in 1066 William the Conqueror couldn't lose? Why? Because he was bringing in the last of the 10 tribes. There was no way knowing that God was going to let him fail. Poor old Harold, if he'd only known that, he could have been still alive. Last verse, well-known verse, and whenever we talk about prophecy, remember the former things of old, for I am God. By the way, I think I found the elusive Exodus. You judge. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, I will do all my pleasure. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, he controls everything. Man that executeth my counsel from a far country, yea, I have spoken it. I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it. I will also do it. So, Mr. Putin, you should take note of that. And all the people said, thank you.